We're going to continue with immigration. We're going to look at this political cartoon. You notice this is Uncle Sam that obviously represents the United States, a congressman. There's a paper here that says Mafia in New Orleans, anarchists in Chicago, socialists in New York. These all representing immigrants. But you notice they are on the Hamilton statue, which of course he was an immigrant. So in this political cartoon, we're looking at several different individuals. First, we see the Russian anarchists, people who are coming into the United States, according to some nativists and some other people. We have the German convict as well. Over here on the front, we have the Italian vagabond. And then right in front of us, we have the German socialist. And then to our left of him, the Polish vagabond as well. So a lot of people began to argue that the United States was allowing all these criminals into the US, and as such, they needed some restrictions. For the most part, they were nativists. Let's look now at the Asian immigration. So most of the Asians arrived at Angel Island in San Francisco, California. Between 1851 and 1883, about 300,000 of them were Chinese immigrants, which was a very low amount of the Asian immigrants in compared to the Europeans that we talked about before. The Chinese immigrants, they were coming from mainly because of the gold rush. They did work in mines, factories, and they become established their own personal businesses because a lot of times they were denied certain loans, or they were denied jobs in certain locations, or they were being persecuted in certain jobs as well. So they started their own business, and for the most part, they did pretty well. The Japanese, about 200,000 of them, Japanese migrated to the United States by 1920. They came from Hawaii. A lot of them had been in Hawaii working there in the crops. By 1920, a lot of them started to come over here. Now, there was discrimination in the Japanese as well. Again, in San Francisco, the San Francisco Board of Education separated Japanese students from European students. That's segregation, of course. President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, in 1906, he comes up with a deal known as the Gentleman's Agreement. And what it did was it banned any more unskilled Japanese workers from entering the United States. And in exchange for that, the San Francisco Board of Education will allow Japanese students to integrate, to be part of the Main Street education. So we do see, again, a little bit of these immigration policies. We do have particular an anti-Japanese sentiment. So the Working Men's Party was led by Dennis Kearney. He was an Irish immigrant himself, but he attacked the Chinese laborers because the Chinese were accepting low wages, because that's all people were willing to pay. So if the Chinese are accepting low wages, then the unions cannot fight for better wages, because the employer will say, well, if you don't want to work for us, that's fine, get out of here. We'll just hire a Chinese immigrant who accepts the wages that we're offering them, and then we don't need to be able to deal with the union. So because of that, there was a full-on attack on Chinese and Chinese immigrants. In 1873, we have an economic depression, and unfortunately, the Chinese were used as scapegoats. Because of them, that economic depression started, and now they are being persecuted like crazy. I'll show you guys a little bit of that. California starts to pass immigration laws. For the most part, they were minimal, but it did kind of establish the foundation for future laws. And then we do have ethnic neighborhoods as well. We have like Chinatown, Little Tokyo, Little Italy for Europeans and other European communities, and African Americans had their own communities as well. So immigration started to a certain extent, cause segregation within the cities as well. And a lot of times they did it because they wanted to be secure with the people that they were with. So Dennis Kearney that you see in this political cartoon that I'm blocking. So this is Dennis Kearney right here. He is working for the Workers' Men's Party, right? And he wants to knock out the Japanese because they are accepting low wages. And you see that back here, Chinatown, right? So he would go in there and attack the Japanese. And he would go on and give speeches and rallies. And every time he ended with this phrase, the Chinese should go, right? So no Chinese. And again, you see attack of the Pacific Railroad workers who did not want the Chinese from working there because the Chinese accepted lower wages. So that was some form of Chinese discrimination in California, but other places as well. And the Chinese Exclusion Act really, really did a really bad thing against the Chinese. It barred Chinese immigration from entering the United States. That was not repealed until 1943, when the Chinese helped the Americans defeat the Japanese during World War II. So that was a little bit of Japanese and Chinese immigration as well. Again, probably the biggest group that was impacted the most were the Chinese, because of this idea that yellow peril, yellow threat, and the yellow people are going to take over the United States. It was more an idea than a reality. So we'll stop here for the Asian immigration.